Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Infraday. I know it's been a long day, and I can tell there's not many people left, and so I feel bad for the panelists that are going to come after my great panel here. But with the rise of EVs and AIs, our world is changing. It's inevitably our world is changing, and tech and infrastructure sort of go hand in hand. And with sort of tech and infrastructure, there needs to be innovation and there needs to be investments, and we are at times seeing them, we're not seeing them. That's why we have great infrastructure transportation leaders in the areas of connected mobility, EV, future cities, to have a conversation about the future of transit, infrastructure, and transportation in not only the Greater Toronto Hamilton area, but across the country, of where we can be leaders for the future. So a little bit about myself. My name is Karan Jandoo. I'm a senior manager at PwC Canada, a former bureaucrat who spent 14 years at various levels of government in land use planning and regulatory side. Now I work for PwC on the side of creating the modern regulator, helping regulators modernize their approvals, modernize their abilities to interact with the regulated entity. And in a lot of ways, everyone in this room is a regulated entity. And so our job is to help you folks all. So that said, I will let my panel members introduce themselves, and we'll go from there.
Does this work? Bryan, Boodhoo, Solicitor for the City of Hamilton. I started my career in New York, and then I joined a large financial firm in Toronto. Then I joined the biggest tech company in Canada, and I found myself in the last decade doing infrastructure and construction law for the City of Hamilton.
Thank you, Bryan.
Okay. Lisa Prime. I'm Chief Planner at the City of Cambridge, and I have, I guess, about 25 years or so experience as a planner working on major infrastructure projects, private sector and public sector. Happy to be here.
Brynn Nheiley. I'm the Executive Director of Community Planning, Regulation and Mobility at the City of Burlington. I started my career in architecture and moved on to planning, and subsequently now have the pleasure of learning from my transportation colleagues that help me to really see what that interface is between our transportation systems and our community planning.
Hi there, my name is Marc Laferriere. I'm going to talk to this side of the room because I feel like you've been ignored for a bit with everybody looking at the moderator over here. So I'm a councillor at the County of Brant for 3 more weeks before I leave politics for at least a long while. But my background is actually as an advocate and a social worker by trade. When I was 14, I went to the city council and fought for public transit, ironically, for my high school. We didn't have one. We were the only high school that didn't. And that was very successful. And I ran in federal politics and didn't do as well as I'd hoped. But the advocacy piece was there, and people convinced me to get back into advocating for public transit, except this time for a small urban rural community, the County of Brant, which composes of places like Paris and St. George, Burford, etc. And we were very successful there. Actually, one of my first votes when I got elected was to create a public transit system, a micro-transit system, similar to the one that was discussed from Northumberland, except we're a couple years ahead. And I agree with everything Bob Sanderson said about that piece there. So I'm going to maybe push through on what that looks like around political will, technology, innovation in small rural communities / small urban rural communities versus, say, the larger and mid-sized communities, because the desire is there for innovation as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Marc, and thank you for the panel. Just a couple of ground rules. I'll present the question. I'd like everyone to go through in the line and then jump in as you feel like. So my first question is, that's sort of really, really important to me. I grew up in the suburbs of Brampton, and it's about first mile and last mile. I went to university at York University, and there was a time, it still is a time, it would be 2 buses to get to the local GO station, take the GO bus or the GO train, and then take another bus to York University. Those sort of transportation modal systems were just not there. And as long as that I've been a professional, we've been talking about first mile, last mile as part of the complete solution. transportation. You go to Europe and you see those sort of first mile, last mile solutions where you don't see a GO train station with 400 parking spots. You see adaptive solutions for us to get there. So Bryan, why don't you give us your input on first mile, last mile solutions and how the city of Hamilton is trying to take that approach?
Sure, thank you. The opinions are my own, not my employer's, and this isn't legal advice. With that out of the way, I think the first mile, last mile issue or problem is also tied with the backbone problem. What is your backbone transit? Because the better backbone transit you have, the less of a problem first mile, last mile is. And it has to be as diverse a solution as it is to the customer. So if you have better backbone transit, you can open yourself up to more active transportation. Biking, bike share, walking, scooters, all those exist in the city of Hamilton. And then some of the more interesting, I think, solutions and conventional solutions, there's mass transit, buses, use of technology to try to avoid some of these connectivity issues. So you don't take 5 buses to get to an LRT, to get to a train, to get to Toronto. So I think using technology will help us determine what are the best first mile, last mile solutions, but it doesn't take away from the need for better investment in backbone transit.
Carrying on with that, that's really relevant to where I'm coming from. In the city of Cambridge, we're looking at what we call Stage 2 ION, which is the backbone coming through Waterloo Region from Waterloo and Kitchener. It is a critical component for me to then get to planning first mile, last mile. The approach based on the Region of Waterloo's official plan work is 15-minute neighborhoods. So that's our policy framework that we'll be continuing to work with to inform how the transportation network connects and how communities are designed to enable these opportunities. So there are multiple layers that go on from the challenge of transit first and an intensification environment that we have, where the population growth for Cambridge will be growing to 2050 from about 150,000 people to over 200. So 50% increase in growth is significant. That means we have lots of intensification that's going to happen that will prioritize, of course, around that backbone transit. And then there's that network that has to connect for first, last mile into the local neighborhoods. So a lot of transition, a lot of focus on education and visualization and helping everyone understand what that future growth will look like. And that extends to transportation because there's a lot of reliance on a very low density community to have a lot of cars, a lot of space for cars, a lot of conversation about cars, and a lot of parking lots. And how do we deal with that transit first shift and building intensification and helping people make choices that they don't need cars and helping, create an environment, where we don't need as much parking, but recognizing the fact that we probably don't just based on demographics and change, and then designing streets for that full complement of innovation and moving technologies. And one of the things we're doing, and I'll stop then so we can get to the rest of the questions, but is around piloting some of these things, right? How we can do education, visualization, piloting, scooters, that sort of thing to help people get comfortable, understand the shift, and then support the change of, road diets and the sort of things we need to do to get there.
It's interesting because the answer to this question, from what I see, despite the name of this panel being technology and new mobility options, is really a throwback to old mobility options. One thing in Burlington that I'm really excited about is there's this new energy and focus around actually, never mind the last mile, let's make that GO train stop the destination. Let's build everything you need to live your life in that destination. So you step off the GO train if that's how you came to and from work, and actually you have everything you need right there. And we're really investing in shortening that last mile or eliminating that last mile. And subsequent to that, looking at what that transportation and land use planning interface is, because so many of our major transit interchanges are on corridors and arterials. And there really is a fundamental disconnect where North American land use planning concentrates our intensification on collectors and arterials. And there is kind of a fundamental conflict of the desired for that corridor or the collector, or arterial to have a free flow of traffic. But as soon as we're putting our intensification on that, we're filling it with people trying to slip into the lane out of their driveway, whether it's a multi-use building or whether it's a small mom and pop shop, left-hand turns, all these things that disrupt that free flow of traffic. So we create these wider and wider roads that then in turn disrupt our desire to build a complete community in those arterial faces. So rethinking how we can change that same right-of-way to function differently, to serve the same objectives, but to do so in a different way is critical to that.
I want to touch on two things. One, that backbone piece. For a community like ours, we have 9 neighbors. We're a donut of a municipality. So the county of Brant is a donut that surrounds the city of Brantford. We're both single-tier municipalities. Ours is only about 40,000 people. Okay? But our neighbors include Brantford, Six Nations, Mississaugas of the Credit, Oxford, Norfolk, Waterloo Region, and Hamilton. Right? And I might be missing one or two, which is kind of funny. All of those communities, most of them I should say, have public transit in a more traditional sense. I actually see some of that backbone and first mile, last mile happening through our communities in that region, where I could see in the future a Cambridge bus that goes to Paris, but also a Brantford bus that goes to Paris, and having some of those interchanges there. But when you're talking first mile, last mile, that's really tough in these rural communities that want public transit, because many of you have moved there from places like Hamilton, Cambridge, Toronto, these big urban centers. You have a demand for it, but the planning over the last 35 years has been without that in mind at all, right? When you have councillors who are opposed to public transit initially, because what they remember is 1992, the buses only having 2 people on them. And nobody's ever brought it up. Then when we do surveys, we find out that 85% to 90% of residents actually want it. The mushy middle wants it in these rural and small urban communities. So if you're in those organizations that are helping build that infrastructure, I honestly think there's a huge market in these small urban rural, but there's going to be a need, and we'll talk about this later, for education of the decision makers about that. Not only the desire for it to be there, but the education about things like first mile, last mile, things like backbone that they wouldn't have heard ever, right? And that becomes part of it as well, that you're really going to have to take that mentality with you to bring those decision makers along, start where they're at, which is an old social work phrase, instead of starting where Toronto is at, or Cambridge is at, or Burlington is at.
Perfect. Thank you, Marc. And I'm actually going to go right back to you. So we had a bit of a gist about political will. Me being a former bureaucrat, there was times that minister would be like, "We have a problem, bureaucrat, solve it." And we'd be like, "Yes, minister." And hopefully people have seen the show Yes, Minister from the UK. And we'd say, "Yes, minister," and be like, "These are our options. Option A, B, C. And this is our recommendation." Minister would respond back and say, can we merge an option? Absolutely, minister, we merge the option. Now we're at a time with the political interference. We are at a time where the minister says, "This is the problem. This is how you're going to solve it. Write the regulation." So is there a political will? Like Marc, you're talking about within this donut, can I say donut municipality of yours that's surrounded by everyone, and inside the jelly, there's Brantford right there. There's that interconnectivity already there, but what it's missing is through that Brant County corridor. Is there political will from the electorate? I know you only have 3 weeks left, but from the 4 years ago, is there will from the 40,000 electorate, or is it that something that you as a council member and you as a rural council community want for the community in the future?
Yeah, so actually one of the things that really helped before I was on council, I presented about this to the council, and some of those folks who aren't there anymore were really supportive. Some of them were not. Some of them literally made things up, like made up facts, fake news, I guess, back in the day, back in 2016, about the harms of public transit. And there's that piece, right? We have to de-getify public transit. What it actually works, that it will help people who are vulnerable. And I grew up with no car. I grew up public transit. I grew up on what was called mother's allowance. I grew up on systems till I was in my mid-20s. But what we need to do is de-getify the advocacy work we do on that. What we found, the political will grew when we, did third-party research to show how much it was wanted. That, yeah, it's not brought up because it's just something that isn't brought up to council very often. And when it is, it's normally by groups doing an anti-poverty piece. And I was part of that group doing that. But what we really found out was the mushy middle wanted it. When I say the mushy middle, I mean mom works in Hamilton and dad works in Cambridge and they have 2 cars and they can't park 3 on their driveway, and their son needs to get to a co-op or a job opportunity. They've had to say no to an awesome co-op at the hospital because they have no way of getting there, right? And then suddenly when that middle group says, we really want this, we really need it, it helps all the other groups that have been saying it for 20 years that they really want it and need it. So there's a social benefit piece, but the real political will happens when the middle group pushes. And finding the data help with approvals, but also bringing options for systems. I think more partnership would have happened over the last 4 years. It's not going to happen in the next 3 weeks, but in the last 4 years, had we not had a 2-year issue with public transit. The good news here, though, and I'll stop in just a sec. The good news here is our microtransit system, we were only out, $70,000 to $110,000 in losses during COVID. Really, really small. The city of Brantford, millions, right? Because we were able to scale a microtransit program, a rideshare program, as opposed to having the buses and subways and streetcars that are very expensive to run when they're empty.
Perfect. So I'll actually reverse the question now back towards Lisa. And Marc talked about the political will as what the electorate wants. Me, once again, as a bureaucrat, you as a bureaucrat now, is there political will from the elected officials or political masters? Are they giving us the runway for innovation or not?
Yeah, so I think there is. So I will speak generally, not specifically on political will. But I can tell you that I think generally we see a lot of really strong recognition of the importance of the investment in infrastructure, that we have to manage that and sort of plan around that, right? So the principle of backbone transit requiring major transit station areas like intensification zones. But then there's that missing middle, as we call it, and figuring out how to get that into the more established neighborhoods is all part of that picture of building a 15-minute city and the opportunity for transit. So I think there is a lot of good recognition for that. I think a lot of the educational perspective that I think about and talk about and look for tools to help everybody, including the public, understand the relationship between housing need, neighborhood design, and emphasis of public realm design, right? Like what that experience of place is all about and what it can look like and how the innovation of these types of transportation solutions fits into that improved system. And I think it was pointed out earlier, the intensification of cities creates that 15-minute neighborhood, creates that opportunity for people to use alternative choices to cars. And if we can show through design what that looks like, I think absolutely people will buy into it, even though, as you stated earlier, Marc, there's often a challenge of who's actually looking for it. And it's frankly everybody, right? It's anybody that's looking to get to work on transit. It's younger people, it's older people. We need to be really dynamic about the types of innovation that we're trying to plan for with transportation, because we got an older population that wants to be right in the communities, that needs mobility options that give them a sense of freedom, for example, right? And that means scooters and mobility vehicles and finding a way to not have clashes with pedestrians and fit all this stuff in and think about what that future might look like that we aren't even sure about yet on innovation.
I'll actually go back to Brynn on that, and then we'll give Bryan a chance on the next question.
I think that what has kind of been in an indirect way said is that everyone's kind of got their door into this, right? Like, it might not be the most explicit rationale to bring in transit, but there's maybe a piece related. Like, I want to get my kid to their summer job so their college is less expensive. And that's been such a critical part in Burlington when we talk about transitioning our transit fleet into an electric bus fleet. It's a really exciting initiative, but there is a number of critical infrastructure hurdles that we're working to overcome right now. And from that political will standpoint, if we have one of our elected representatives who's maybe not a huge bus advocate, but you know what? Their constituents, they want to have their electric cars plugged in the underground parking lot of their condo building. That infrastructure need is related and the same. So it's finding those commonalities. Maybe you're not here for the bus, but maybe you're here for your constituents who want to plug in their electric car. And with that, we can help you build the story to build your own political will within you to then go to Burlington Hydro, where you're one of the board members, and help us work with Burlington Hydro to build out that infrastructure and help them see the path forward that builds our modern communities. So those partnerships that we've built with our elected officials to understand what their needs are, and subsequently the partnerships that we've built with the other jurisdictions of government, the utility companies that we worked hand in hand with, those are all so critical to building that political will based on each unique perspective and each unique way into that need and that next step.
Perfect. Thank you, Brynn, for that. So one thing we kept hearing about was relationship building, commonality, and education. And I think of relationship building as, central to all of that. So, Bryan, why don't you take the road on relationship building and education of the future for us?
So I couldn't agree with you more, Brynn. Building relationships is so important for advancing technologies and making sure that the future regulations, whatever we see in the future, we're a part of. And I'll give you an example. We have great institutions in the city of Hamilton. We have McMaster University and Mohawk College, and they are both committed to researching technology. So whenever we have an opportunity in transportation technology, whenever we have an opportunity to partner with them, we do so. So one is 5G technology, putting that up, having a playground on what we call the mountain, but really the escarpment. We have a playground on the escarpment where we play with 5G technology and we see what it can do. And we have professors there who are able to give us data and we can use data. And when inevitably we get to the point when 5G technology will be heavily regulated, we will have some idea of where we want to go, how we can use it, and what we need to see as a city to be able to enact that technology. And that's just the beginning. We can see connected and autonomous vehicles coming forward, street robots coming forward, drone delivery. So there's quite a bit. It's a brave new world out there in terms of the technology that's going to happen. And I think also the regulation on how that will happen too. So having partners will be essential to all those aspects of transportation and mobility.
Floor is open.
I guess I would just add part of that is always, keeping the public interest objectives. Then that's me as a planner. I'm always going to come back to that, right? We want innovation. We want technology. We need to keep our eye on the public interest aspect of what we're trying to implement and what the value is that we're getting out of it, and then find our way to those partnerships and creating the space.
Perfect.
Part of what we've been thinking about at the City of Burlington around education is just like hitting pause on our own language that we're using when we're talking about these different issues. So I wish that I could reference the exact article. Maybe I'll send it through Karan after this event. But there was an article that was just this lightning bolt of obviousness to me as soon as I read it. And it was like, what are the words that we're using? For example, when there's a civic event or a parade or some sort of festival, we're closing the street. Actually, what we're doing is we're closing car access to the street, but we're opening the street for everybody else. And so just to hit pause on the language that we're using when we're talking to constituents, to residents, to elected officials, and to our partners, what are we trying to accomplish? And are we using the words that convey that? Another example that we are just starting to nibble the edges on now is the city of Burlington for years has been talking about doing our downtown parking study. Okay, let's hit pause. Do we really want to have a downtown parking study, or do we want to have a downtown access study? And part of that access will include parking, no doubt. But how else? What are the other options we're giving to our residents and to visitors to the area to get to our downtown so that we're not undermining the local businesses by surrounding them in seas of parking lot? And instead, we're just filling those spaces with people and uses and, wonderful opportunities.
And before Marc, you go, we have 4 minutes left. So please begin on your side and we'll come back here for our sort of closing points.
So dovetailing from what Brynn just said, we had that piece. We actually called our transit system E-Ride, and then we realized that one, people thought it was a taxi service, though it wasn't, and the demands of a taxi service are different than a public transit system. So we rebranded to Brant Transit. But two, that we needed to run 2 concurrent setups. Because a rural community, like I said in social work, start where people are at, not where you hope they are, right? And we had just had an app and just had online access, and we realized, no, we need to have a traditional call center as well, where somebody actually can call and book a public transit ride. And both those things running concurrently create a lot more success than just the innovation, just trying to treat it like we are Burlington when we're not like Brantford. Right. So that's really helpful to look at how intentional you are about your words. But building a relationship also means not leaving folks behind, especially older folks and some rural folks, in terms of how you deliver innovation. That you have to have that back door. You can still come into the office. You can still make a phone call. That actually created a lot less anxiety and a lot of opportunity.
It's hard to make a conclusion from all the things we've talked about today and so many great points with my fellow panelists. I really, Marc, appreciate your last point there about not leaving anyone out. And that is so fundamental to the buy-in. And it's true whether we're talking about the people that we're serving or whether it's talking about our colleagues that we're working with. We have different generational expectations with our colleagues too, and how to go about doing those things. So being open and communicative and transparent is ultimately the way we're going to succeed in all of these things, to bring forward new ideas without creating the impression that we're shutting down or disparaging the old way things have happened, but learning from those things and benefiting where it makes sense to benefit from that historic knowledge, and sensitively introducing new ways of thinking.
Yeah, so if I can just pick up on something you said earlier that we also did, the conversation is always about parking, right? And yet you're not really talking about parking on some of this stuff. So at budget time, I also reframed our work that we need to do around, I forget what we called it, but it's not parking strategy. It's sort of transportation, alternate mode, access strategy or something like that. But because we need to figure out EVs, we need to figure out scooters, we need to figure out how all these things integrate with the master planning work that we're doing and what the need actually is. And yes, parking is one of the things that will come out of it, but it is not what we're studying, right? So reframing that was really important. And I think I would otherwise just conclude with, I'm a big supporter for interim use opportunities, showing what it looks like, closing streets, to use the negative, I realize here today, just for the first time, that it's the guys in works that we need to change their signs, because when we do this stuff in open streets, they put up a closed street sign. So we have to get them new signs to go with the mantra, right? But these are the best opportunities, finding places to, like I said, pilot scooters, try stuff out, and then move towards what that policy and implementation plan can be is a big way to, I think, have success.
I suppose I have the last word. So I will say this. Bring your lawyers in early and often. They can be a great resource to you, and they will help you navigate the landscape. They're more creative than you think. And we've read as many contracts as most people have read news articles. So we're a valuable resource, and we can help you out. Thanks.
He's absolutely right. Lawyers do get the last word. But thank you, everyone. I think this was a very insightful panel, and I think one of the main things we got out of all of this is sort of this relationship building that we're going to be doing in this room, and just it's about knowledge transfer and the world is changing, but it's these sort of human interactions post-COVID that we can have and generate this knowledge and transfer it for the betterment of our future. Thank you, everyone.